So hence the reason we've invited you on to try and I don't, no offense to the people watching and listening, not when I say dumb down, it's not necessarily for you, it's for me as well. But obviously the majority of us, Kieran, aren't qualified accountants. We can look at the spreadsheets quite thoroughly and still not actually understand a word of it, really. And me for one, I don't profess to be any sort of financial professional. So I think probably a good starting point really is actually on the main part of the accounts in terms of profit loss. How does it look from a professional's perspective and point of view?
Well, let's start with the good news. It was the most revenue that Leeds United Football Club has ever generated in a year. So that's the good bit. But then we move on to this thing of profit. And in terms of the day-to-day running of the club, it was losing £1.5 million, £2 million a week, which is a little bit scary. And the reason for that is that the club, to a certain extent, lost control of the costs. And the major costs, as far as the club were concerned, are player costs, and you got wages. I estimate they were playing, and this is in a relegation season, so therefore, they wouldn't have got end of season bonuses for avoiding relegation and things like that. I reckon they were paying on average over 70 grand a week in wages. And then the other big cost is transfer fees, and the way that they were accounting for transfer fees. Again, it was costing the club £1.5 million a week in what we refer to as amortization. You put the two player cost figures together, and for every £100 that Leeds United generated during 22-23, remember they were a Premier League club. They got really good gate receipts. They got of the what you might call the other 14 clubs. They're right at the very top in terms of commercial appeal. They were still spending £120 on your player costs. So that's before you put the floodlights on. That's before you got transport to away matches. That's before you put petrol in the mower for the groundsman. They're already losing money, and that had me scratching my head.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think in terms of the actual. I mean, I've broken down best I can. In terms of the actual revenue, then, so year on year, we have seen small growth. I think it was 0.2% in this year's, last year's figures, the ones that were released in April. But the wages, I think the wages was one of the areas that's really shocked me. £146 million spent on wages throughout a relegation season is berserk. I mean, I know we'll probably come on to JKA in a very short while, but I assume that's included, hopefully.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think I've stuck it elsewhere. Because it wasn't a wage as such, it was a compensation fee. But I mean, you rightly said £146 million in 2023. If we go back to 2019, which was the season before promotion, it was £100 million less. So, for a club that's been around forever and a day, as we both know, that is sensational increase. And I'm here on Football Finance. I'm not here to talk football. You do wonder who was receiving those wages, because there's an argument for saying that whoever was receiving them wasn't delivering in lines with the expectation. I think it's the 10th or 11th highest wage bill in the Premier League. You wouldn't expect to get relegated on that basis.
No, absolutely not. And I suppose one of the other things that I didn't really understand when it was broken down was actually we spent we owe £190 million for these players. Now it says you said that net cash spend on players was actually close to zero. So can you sort of break that down? How can we owe 190 million but actually it be net spend of zero, in terms of players, because we only sold Rafinha and Calvin Phillips within that time frame, and I understand we received something around about £100 million for the two players.
Right. The reason why the net cash spend was close to zero was Leeds United bought players for £170 million during the course of 22-23, but they didn't pay for them. They effectively used the club credit card. So the net transfer spend was 83 in terms of the difference between the players coming in and the players going out. So, well, that's quite. Where's that 83 million pounds come from? It's because what the club did. It says we bought the players, but we're not paying for them until 2024, 2025, 2026, and wherever. So that's why we've got this crazy situation that on a cash basis everything looked okay, but that meant that the numbers didn't add up. What's happened was that Leeds, at the start of 2022, owed £100 million in outstanding instalments on transfers, and by the end of the season, that £100 million have gone up to 190. So they've effectively just shifted the issue of paying for those players onto the never never. And the reason why that had me worried was it's again, I'm going back here a few years. Go back to 2018, and Leeds owed £3 million. So yeah, to go from, it's a bit like on your credit card. I always say to my wife, if you've got a credit card limit, it's a limit, it's not a target. And she doesn't necessarily see it in the same way as I do. But if you're just living on credit all the time, eventually you're going to have to start to pay that money back. And that means that in terms of, best case scenario for this season, Leeds United get promoted. You as fans are thinking, great, we can go and spend. But if we already owe £190 million for transfers, can you see that's going to be very restrictive in terms of what the club can do? That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, Leeds United stay in the Championship. And then all of a sudden you're thinking, well, Christ, how they've got 50 or 60 million pounds worth of instalments to pay over the course of the next 12 months. Parachute payments are down by about 20%. How's the club going to have the cash to pay all of this outstanding money in respect of players who either weren't good enough or now going on loan or have been sold? And you can have a ludicrous situation that you owe money in respect of players who are no longer at the club. And that's my concern. Now, ideal world, you get promoted, which is fine. Should the fans be worried? In my view, no, because I think 49ers will plug the gaps, or they'll get other people to plug the gaps for them. But we both know the history of Leeds United, and when the club went through those horrible years, when it was effectively being treated as a pass the parcel by a series of undesirable owners who are out to make a quick buck. You don't want to get into that situation where you are seen as a lot of debt embedded in the club.
Kieran, on that topic there as well, some of the stuff that was in the report said that Leeds owed 73 million in installments between June 23 and June 24. So you would assume that we're in that period now, that money has either been paid. The sales of Luis Sinister and Tyler Adams come to about 45 million. So you would assume that that's money being used to pay that off, and possibly why Leeds decided to sell Sinister mid-loan and not wait until the end of the period to try and offset some of that. So that 73 million comes out of that 190 million. Is it safe to assume that the 190 million is then broken down over a couple of years, like certain blocks like this 73 million, and therefore Leeds could potentially then offset that with sales should they need to? Or, as you mentioned, commercial deals, if they get back to the Premier League, increased commercial deals that hopefully somebody like the 49ers behind them can bring in?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Of that 190 million pounds total, 70 million pounds due in 23-24, perhaps another 70 million pounds in 24-25, and 40 million, 50 million, whatever it is, in 25-26. So it is a gradual commitment. And I've got to be honest, it's not unusual in football. What we have seen very much over the course of the last decade, is clubs moving towards buying players on credit. Now, if you're in the Premier League and you stay in the Premier League, you've always got the benefits of the Premier League TV deal behind you, to allow you to make those payments when they fall due. It becomes more of a problem when you drop into the Championship. I mean, Manchester United, I think they owe about 360 million. Spurs over 300 million, and I'm not worried. As much as I might intensely dislike one of those clubs, and I won't name it, I think you can probably guess. But they've got so much cash coming in on an annual basis. Manchester United and Spurs both make 500 or 600 million a year, so they've also got assets to sell. They're in a strong cash position. Leeds in the Championship are in a trickier one. Selling a player between the end of the season and the 30th of June to be there to have the cash to pay the instalments is the way forwards. But of course, that's not what you want to do. You want to see your best players stay. You want to sell players because it's in the best interests of the player, possibly, but Leeds United most of all, in terms of keeping hold of the best talent, rather than having a bank manager or a finance professional saying, look, you need to sell 2 players by this date because otherwise you're going to miss your instalments. And as we saw yesterday, in respect of Sheffield United, they're going to have a 2-point deduction in the EFL because Sheffield United failed to pay instalments on the due dates in respect of players that they purchased. So is there a sanction? Is there a downside to this? Yes, there is.
Small. In terms, you mentioned then that we'd have to potentially sell players to balance the books, if you like, and not even necessarily to balance the books, but just to get through this payment period without any sanctions. But where would we stand in terms of investment? How does it have to be through player sales due to PSR then?
No, it doesn't. So from a PSR point of view, based on my calculations, Leeds United are in a strong position. If you take a look at the losses for the 3 seasons, they came to around about £80 million because Leeds did have player sales in 22-23, which were really beneficial for the club. You're allowed to lose 105 in 3 years in the Premier League. And those losses that I've quoted to you of £80 million, that's before all of your, what you might call your virtue adjustments. You add back for infrastructure costs, for your academy costs, for your women's team costs, for your community scheme. And I reckon of that £80 million of loss, you probably add back, in the case of Leeds United, probably around about 50. So from a PSR point of view, they're absolutely fine. I'm more concerned about things on a cash flow basis, which is spectacularly dull, but it's what I do. I used to work for the administrators when I was a professional accountant before I went into teaching, and the most common reason why businesses go bust because they were just crap at managing their cash. Not that I'm saying I'm only good at it myself. I'm dreadful.
We've got personal experience in that, Kieran, going back to the Ridsdale era. We didn't manage our money and we lived the dream. But
yes,
I wanted to ask you about this as well, Kieran. In terms of plugging the gap with the 49ers, I know in days gone by, an owner could put whatever amount of money they wanted into the club of their own pocket. Is that still the case anymore? Or are they restricted by a certain percentage of what they're allowed to put in terms of writing off debt themselves by personal wealth?
They can put as much physical cash into the club as they desire. So if they got the money, they want to put it in, they want to pay some of the bills, that's great. How much of that cash counts towards PSR is a different issue. You're effectively allowed to put, for PSR purposes, roughly £90 million over 3 years of your own cash into the club. So that there's not an issue. If they got £20 million, which they owe on an instalment on a player, and 49ers say, yeah, here's 20 million quid, not a problem.
Just really quickly, Kieran, you mentioned there about this, these purchases and the player purchase being done on the Never Never on a credit card, and you say it's obviously quite common now. In your opinion, do you think that's something our previous ownership has done purposely because they knew there was a potential sale moving forward? And if so, where is this missing money, if you like, gone? Then where is these millions of pounds gone?
Yeah, well, Leeds bought players. If you take a look at the 3 seasons in the Premier League, Leeds' total spend on players was 270 million quid. That was the total investment. Now, part of that clearly came from the new owners, so the old owners, in terms of them signing off on those accounts. What they did was they said, well, we're not prepared to put cash into the club to pay off those transfer debts. What we'll do is we'll effectively kick that can down the road. 49ers have been involved. You know, the likes of Parag, who we know have been connected with the club for a number of years. So they will have been aware of the strategy of Radrazani and co. And therefore they must have been presumably at ease with it. But they knew that they were inheriting that obligation to pay all of those other clubs these pretty substantial sums of money.
Is there a danger of that, as you say, the can being kicked down the road? That's a very different.
That's a specialist video channel. That is.
Is there a danger of that then carrying on? I mean, obviously the 49ers investment group are a number of investors. Now, they're probably not going to all jump out and say, right, here's 10, 20 million we'll just throw at the club. You know, they're in it to make money, I should imagine, at the end of the day. And I was suggesting, I mean, I'm talking purely out of speculation here and suggesting we don't get promoted. Will they continue to use that credit card and continue to see the club go into further debt?
I don't think you'd see an increase in that figure if the club is not in the Premier League. What they will be looking to do is to use the player trading model to generate cash to allow them to meet the instalments and to pay down debt, which of course is not what you want to hear as fans. You know, you're looking to get back to the Premier League as quickly as possible. Although I always say to people, Championship's far more fun than the Premier League.
Yes,
I completely agree.
You know, it's and also if you crap on a Saturday, you've always got Tuesday to recover. Whereas in the Premier League, sometimes you go 8-9 days of misery. So it's not the be all of the end all, and Leeds are the biggest fish in my view in the Championship, and you go with that level of expectation. As you know, in what it was like in the Premier League, first season, breath of fresh air, and also the tragedy that you couldn't physically be there. But it becomes a bit of a slog, and as Leeds United fans, you shouldn't be spending your time worrying about what's happening to Bournemouth and Brighton and Palace and Norwich when they're playing in the Premier League. But that's what you end up doing, because it was and Brighton have had plenty of seasons down the bottom, and it's not. We've had 2 enjoyable seasons, but we've had 5 pretty mediocre ones as well, and it's not the end of the world from a footballing point of view to stay in the division, but it does have financial implications.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I much prefer Novar and all that, all the other stuff that comes with the cleansed Premier League, overly cleansed, I would say, but until you get into the finances. But yeah, I think suppose the real question for me is, do you feel? I mean, again, we're going to be speculating because nobody knows the funds and things. But if taking into account all the things that we've heard about player wages being halved and up to 60% they've reduced. Obviously, the sales, as Joe mentioned, of Sinistera, of Tyler Adams, we probably look to offload most of the guys who were out on loan. So, if we don't get promoted, based on all of those potentials and the speculation around those, when you don't, do you as an accountant see us being in any trouble in the foreseeable future? I suppose I think that's Leeds' biggest, a Leeds fan's biggest concern is, if we don't get promoted, how much shit are we in?
do those players that are out on loan being sold and the wage reductions equal no fire sale next season? Should we not go up?
I think from a cash flow point of view, I'm not worried. And I know you are concerned about, American investors are not in football for the love of football. They're in it for the love of money. But they're also in it on a long-term basis. So I don't see that as being an issue. 24-25, because in my view, Leeds are in a strong PSR position at present, then I don't see that as being a problem. And also you do have the second year of your parachute payments. So your parachute payments, probably around about £42 million this season, 34 next season. When we get to 25-26, then it drops to about 15. That becomes slightly more problematic. You're only allowed to lose £13 million a season in the Championship. So you've got to acclimatise either through players' contracts expiring. I don't know what the position is at the end of 24, but I expect there'll be quite a few more expiring at the end of 25. So shifting the big earners off your payroll. Then 25-26 would be my concern next season, not so.
And that's suggesting we don't sign any players. Obviously, that's with offloading and
yeah, but you don't have to spend a lot of money in the Championship. You are fishing in a different pond.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say to people, signing smart is so much better than signing big, as you know from the
It's
player.
easy to say as a Brighton fan, though, Kieran. Let's be honest. You've had some belters over the last few years.
Well, we have, but it's only because we've mugged off Chelsea every single time. 62 million for Cucurella, 115 million for Caicedo, and 22 million for Potter.
Yeah, nuts.
And 25 million for our third choice goalkeeper.
Yeah,
it was such a prima donna that he refused to sit on the bench when he was picked. So we go, Chelsea give 25 million. Yeah, fine. So we're not going to mug off those goons. And I know you like Chelsea, dislike Chelsea probably more than I do.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to find such idiots in the future.
Yeah.
Well, as long as Chelsea are still there with a big checkbook. I wanted to ask you about the Chelsea situation, but also not just Chelsea, but in general, the PSR stuff. We're finally seeing a situation where FFP and PSR are showing it's showing its teeth finally properly, and everyone is now saying it's not working. We want to change the model so we don't have to do this anymore, which that's the Premier League top six. But what I wanted to ask about this was obviously Chelsea started this last year by spreading payments out over 8-year contracts. The Premier League went, nah, you can't do that. We're not having that. And they pulled it back to 5. Do you see this as a long-term sustainable model for Premier League clubs to keep these transfers on 5-6-year contracts or 5-year contracts with the amount of money being spread? Because the fees for transfers are only going to get higher. The wages are only getting bigger. This is going to be trickier to keep spreading these payments out over 5-year blocks consistently going forward and still giving your fans what they want every year in terms of big signings and being competitive at the top end of the Premier League.
Well, I think we really did see that start to bite in the January window. Total spending 100 million compared to 800 million in January 23. Now, I appreciate in 23, Saudi was still big. Chelsea thought that they'd worked a way of screwing the system by signing players on 8-year contracts, and that can't be repeated. If you look at the sides that were promoted to the Premier League in 22-23, you got Burnley, who've been modest in terms of their purchases. Sheffield United, who we've already discussed, they got promoted, sold their 2 best players and didn't reinvest a dime. And Luton, who have said, hey, we're in the Premier League. This is going to be our one season. We're going to love every single minute. And I'd be delighted if they stayed up on the basis of that. And so they've not spent big. Forest weren't able to spend because they knew they were in deep poo. Everton had also cut back. Chelsea had cut back. So it's an awful lot of sort of pieces fell into place. I think you're absolutely right. And you're one of the very few people to notice that once PSR started to work, we then decide that we don't like it. It was 10 years when it wasn't impacting upon people. Spending was getting bigger and bigger. People were getting bolder and bolder and brasher because they didn't think that the Premier League would actually apply the rules. So sustainable. It's not sustainable on a profit basis. I've got the numbers in front of me. On a day-to-day basis, only West Ham made a profit in 22-23. Even Brighton, had it not been for Todd Bowley, Brighton would have lost 16 million quid. So that's how reliant they were. And the only reason why West Ham make a profit is that all three of us and everybody listening to this show, we're paying for their stadium. Because they're paying £3 million a year rent on a stadium which costs £700 million to convert into a football stadium from the Olympic Stadium. So it's only because we're having our trousers taken down with regards to that. But West Ham themselves, and I don't have any issue with what the club did. When you negotiate a contract, there's two sides to it. If one side's a bunch of clueless politicians and idiots, then so be it.
Go for it. Yeah.
Great stuff. Last couple of things, then, Kieran, for me. I do appreciate it. We've all got other places to be this afternoon. So, first thing, Augustine, the worst transfer ever for you financially? I mean, he's obviously the most expensive ever.
I think I put it out. Was it something like £14,000
£13,715 per second at football?
It's great to have it.
Yeah. Who signed off on that?
I think he's still here, to be fair. I think Angus Kinnear is well, he must have had something to do with it. But he's,
I think
he must be good at his job. Did he get £500,000 pay rise?
Yep.
Yeah,
for signing somebody like Augustine, there's something going on there. Anyway, we speculate.
Not a good deal.
No, not good. And then the last thing, the last thing for me is just to, I suppose, put everyone at rest. As far as you're concerned, then promotion or relegation, Leeds United financially are in a good position up until you would suggest around about 2026, provided if we don't get promoted until then.
From a PSR point of view, I think the club's got a fair amount of flexibility. From a cash flow point of view, assuming that the investors are still willing to invest, and we've seen it at other clubs, then again, I don't foresee a Bates Motel type of scenario. I don't know where I got that name from. That the club might have been had to suffer through before.
Yeah, hopefully not.
Smashing. Anything to add, Joe?
No, just thanks very much for this, Kieran. Thanks for clarifying a few bits and pieces for us as well. And it's nice to know the club is in a positive financial position, even should the worst happen this year and avoid promotion.
Yeah. I think you're not to lose sleep over this.
Fair enough.
Brilliant. Again, thanks ever so much for Kieran for coming on again this year. Really, really appreciate it. Hopefully see you again next year. Certainly when the accounts might be looking a little bit more positive because we'll have been promoted by then. Who knows?
Exactly. Take care, guys.
Thanks ever so much. Cheers, Kieran. Cheers, Joe. Take care, James.
Thanks,